Alright, Wizard, I'm off to vacation. Do you need anything before I leave? What are you playing? What? Oh, I'm just playing this first-person shooter. First-person shooter? Come on. You wouldn't know a good game if it hit you in the face. Please don't throw a game at my face. That would be hard. You're right. Handing things to you always looks so much better. Here. Oh, thank you. What is this game anyway? Dragon Warrior? Is this some kind of Final Fantasy? What did you just say? Final Fantasy wishes it was Dragon Warrior. Come on, just give it a chance. You're gonna love it. I know how much you love dragons. Well, you got me there. I do love dragons. And it's something that first-person shooters tend to skimp out on for some reason. Okay, I'll play this game. I hope it doesn't take too long, though. I'd like to do it as a weekend review. It took me 3 months. I would like to blame this on my busy work schedule. I do have a full-time job, and obviously that means my YouTube channel doesn't get the attention that I would like to give it. But that wasn't entirely the case with this game. I've had plenty of free nights where I would stare at this game on my shelf and decide that watching The Office for the 30th time was more important. And the game isn't that bad, it's just, and I am sorry if I offended any diehard fans, boring. I've said it on the channel before that I don't care for JRPGs. I think Octopath Traveler is an incredible game, but I only played for 4 or 5 hours. I barely scratched the surface of that game, I'm sure, and I haven't gone back. What is it about this genre that doesn't appeal to me? There's only one way to find out. I have to play through as many JRPGs as I can this year. I don't believe I will play through all the Dragon Warrior games, but thanks to my roommate and Christmas, I now own the first 4. My research begins at the start of the series and maybe, just maybe, will end with me having a new appreciation for the genre and for the series in particular. But having just played through the first game, I could tell you that the respect that I'm hoping to find isn't quite here. Dragon Warrior, or Dragon Quest as it was known in Japan, and would be known to America, was released in 1989, 3 years after its Japanese release. The game was made by Yuji Horii and his team in an attempt to make an easily accessible RPG for players who are not already familiar with Dungeons & Dragons, and took inspiration from other PC games like Wizardry and Ultima. In the Japanese production, they hired manga artist Akira Toriyama, creator of Dragon Ball, to do the artwork. A lot of his influence on the game was lost in translation into the North American release, however. Sprites and dialogue were changed to be more Elizabethan in nature, and in my personal quest, I am only playing the American versions of the game, so these changes will not play a part in my overall experience with the game, but I thought they were neat and worth mentioning. The game starts by telling you may be the heir to the great Erdrick, known in this land to have defeated the evil Dragon Lord, and oh no, the Dragon Lord is back. So it's up to you to collect the 3 things to make a rainbow bridge and defeat the Dragon Lord just like Erdrick. Luckily enough for the king, I am in fact an heir of Erdrick, so this will be easy peasy lemon 30 hours later. On my journey, I fought through hundreds of enemies to get a sword. I did this again for an axe, and then for some shields and armor. I got trolled by the developers, wasting a key to talk to 2 guards that both told me to ask the other guard. After 5 minutes, I figured out that this was just Enix toying with me, and the other guards did not have the information that I wanted. I then went dungeon diving to defeat a dragon, who had a princess. I returned her. I found some shiny armor laying on the ground. I put a golem to sleep with a flute. And I purchased a nice fire sword with my hard-earned money. I took this fire sword and found the last of 3 artifacts that I was collecting. I brought my artifacts to a dude who gave me the last ingredient to a bridge that I needed to fight the Dragon Lord. I then spent 6 more hours grinding to fight him. Along the way, I looked up a guide for the first time in my playthrough and found a secret passage that led me to a neat sword that someone just left lying around. I then made my way to the Dragon Lord, who offered me to have half of the world, and I completed the game in style. The quest was over, and my Dragon Lord ruled the land with an iron fist. What a game. Well, my roommate informed me that I have to defeat him in battle to get the real ending, which I did with little resistance. Once defeated, I traveled back to the kingdom where the princess and I get to live happily ever after. After 30 or so hours, I have to have some opinions on this game, right? Well, here they are in no particular order. Armor doesn't make you any less vulnerable. This is one of my biggest complaints about the game. I would spend hours leveling up and grinding for gold to buy the town's armor and weapons, only for the armor to not have a significant difference in battle. I'm sure there was, but looking at the stats, most armor only increased your defense by a few points, and maybe games like Fable and The Elder Scrolls have spoiled me, but when I upgrade my armor, I expect the enemies in the area around me to be less hurty. Like, how are the townspeople still alive? If the blacksmith isn't making armor that can stop the attacks of the enemies that live around that town, it just doesn't make sense to me. Nothing significant happens in between the grind. I get it. This is an early RPG on the NES, but there is so little to do when you get to most towns, and it takes so long to get to them. You grind for hours getting to a level that getting to the town won't result in your death. You get to the town, you talk to the 5 NPCs in that town, they don't have much to say, or they give you a cryptic hint for something important later in the game that you absolutely will forget as you get to the point you need the hint. You will find out how much the new better sword and shield and armor cost, then spend another 4 or 5 hours grinding for cash to buy them. You get them, you go to the next town, rinse and repeat. Now some towns are larger and one town has a hidden dungeon underneath it, but boy, let me tell you, one of the most frustrating parts of this game are the parts that have you walk on the outskirt of a town to get to something. One wrong step and you're overworld city, baby. I went the whole game thinking that there were only 3 songs in the entire game, but the end boss music was new and the credits music was as well. They were just holding off for the epic conclusion, and I respect that, but some variety in battle music would have been appreciated. The sound of dying cats every time there was an encounter was enough for me to want to skip them entirely, but running from encounters would leave you weak and squishy. Sometimes these encounters would happen one after the other too, like give me some breathing room in between battles. I just got over the cat wailing. How are you going to throw me right back into it so fast? I do like the variety of enemies. Yes, there are basically 5 or so enemies with swap palettes, but I think this is a genius way to handle space issues on the NES hardware. There were 3 different types of slime. There were skeletons, wraiths, demon warriors. There were magicians, warlocks, and wizards. And no, that did not get confusing given what I named my character. There were stone mans and gold mans. There were green, blue, and red dragons. And that first encounter with the green dragon was a doozy. I've always liked this concept of making a mid-game boss a late-game common enemy. It's a brilliant way to show the player how much progress they've made. I first encountered this concept in the upside-down portion of Castlevania Symphony of the Night, when Gaben and Slogra show up as just random enemies that you can kill pretty quickly. And since I'm not doing any real-world research at this point, I'm gonna say that Dragon Warrior came up with this concept, so kudos to them. Having armor that heals you when you walk is an amazing fix to the grinding problem I have in the early game. I'm not saying late game grinding didn't make me want to rip my eyes out, but when I got that magic armor, it really did something for me. I found a nice spot with enemies that I could beat, that gave me a decent amount of XP, that I would farm until my health was low. I would walk into a cave that did not have enemies, walk around it until I regained all of my health, and then start over. This sped up the process only because I no longer had to grind, travel back to a town, spend time at an inn, go back to the grinding hole. I know this is the intention from the developers, and I'm giving them mad props for this. Having a town that wasn't a town. I actually love this. You visit 4 or so towns, get the section of the game that is super out-leveled for you, and decide to visit the town for refuge, only to find that it was destroyed to even higher level enemies. Erdrick's armor is here for some reason, but that's awesome because it's better magic armor and it's free, and I will take that any day. I actually really like the dungeon design. You go into the first dungeon that doesn't have enemies in it, but it's completely black room. You have to get a torch to light your way, but the torch only has like a 3x3 area of effect. This is a really neat concept and definitely contributed to the dungeons feeling more like complex labyrinths. And while I had my roommate to help me walk through these areas, he did want to see me finish the game more than I did. I could see, as a kid, spending hours lost in these dungeons, trying to map out these areas, finding where all of the treasures are, all while more and more difficult enemies pop up to battle. I could not imagine the amount of time I would have to spend coming back to these areas over and over. And while I feel like that would have brought me frustration, I also see how struggling to progress in the dungeons would have felt more rewarding than struggling in the overworld. I do wish that there were more scripted bosses, though. I expected each dungeon to be equipped with a high-level boss that I would need to defeat to get to the main thing from that dungeon, but for the most part, this is not the case. There are only 4 scripted battles that I was able to find: the battle for Erdrick's armor, the golem that you put to sleep with a whistle, the green dragon guarding the princess, and the final boss. This could have been much more considering each of the dungeons. That definitely left something to be desired. Back to one of my earlier comments about cryptic hints. I think in the 80s especially, gamers would keep pen and paper with them and write things down. I think I remember my dad telling me that he had a chart paper and mapped out the first Zelda as he played it. I actually just sent him a text to verify, and it is true. This is something that they did. My generation grew up in a computer and internet world. The generation below me grew up with internet in their pockets. But that generation grew up with pen and paper. And I'm sure that in that day, they would write down the dialogue that stood out from, "Hey, welcome to name of our city, and I don't have time for this dialogue." And these notes probably look something like, "The man in the city told me that the princess is to the east. Should probably check that out. A lady in a different city told me to check 4 spaces south of the fountain. I should really remember that." And with that diligent note-taking, when they came across the only named fountain in the game, they knew to go south to get that flute. It just happened to remember the fountain on my playthrough, so I got lucky. And there's my main problem. I don't have the ability to play this game in the 80s when it came out. I'm not saying that it didn't age well, but the world evolved around it. I'm in a world full of distractions. I have so many other options. At the time, kids would have this game and a few others maybe, and to go outside. The choice was obvious, and the grinding makes sense. If you break this down into things you do and battles, you only do about an hour of things and 29 hours of fighting. And yes, I cheated and used a save state for the end because I absolutely needed to get through this game and be done with it. But kids that played this without that ability would have to walk back to the end of the game every time that they died. But they would be getting a little stronger each time that they did. And eventually, that last boss would not have been as stressful. I've seen people beat this game at a lower level than I did, and I do not understand how. It would take a lot of luck. And if I was playing this at the same time as a friend, bragging about getting to that cap, level 30, or finding the Erdrick armor before my friends, and then needing to know where it is, that is what would have made this experience so much different for me. And in fact, it was just that. Whenever I got into a rough patch, I would talk to my friends who played the game years ago, and they would have such nostalgia for this. I have the same feeling when someone is playing through A Link to the Past for the first time, and I know that if anyone I knew started playing this, I would have that same feeling for knowing where things are and where they need to go next. The only real difference is with Zelda, it will not take them 10 hours to be able to get to the next location, and I would be able to sit there and watch them get to that location with ease. The other thing I'm told by those same friends is to carry on. The later games get less and less grindy as they go on, and I'm looking forward to that. I really like seeing games grow over time, and it's also reassuring that even people who like this style of game can agree that the first one goes a little overboard with the grind. But for now, I'm not going to give this game a rating. I may do away with the ratings altogether on my channel, but I would encourage anyone who is listening, let me know what you would rate Dragon Warrior 1. I really like reading how other people experienced the game. I got a comment from someone who figured out how to play Magic the Gathering Battle Mage, and they loved it. In any case, I know that I am finally done playing Dragon Warrior. Did I hear that somebody beat Dragon Warrior 1? Yes. Yes, I did. I beat a game before reviewing it. Are you proud of me? Yes. So proud. Anyway, here's Dragon Warrior 2 for you to play. Have fun!